Hey, what's going on, everybody? Welcome in. It's Friday. You made it, folks. You made it to the end of the week. We got a full house here today at the Gorilla Sports Studios. I'm Jesse Montano, going to be joined by Meghan Angley in just a minute. We got Charlie in the house today, Chloe, John, and Ashley all behind the scenes today, making this come right into your ear holes. We're going to be talking Central Division Day. We're going to put a bow on the Pacific Division conversation that we ran out of time on. We're a couple yappers here. But then we're going to talk about the Central Division, keying on the Colorado Avalanche and what type of competition they are up against this year and what continues to look like the toughest division in hockey. But you guys know where we're starting. Want to remind you about our great friends over at Trusted American Mortgage. Head on over to trustedamerican.com. They want to help you lower your interest rate, get a better monthly payment. If you act right now, might even be able to help you skip a couple months of your mortgage payment there. Who couldn't use that now as we're transitioning out of summer, heading into, Meghan, we're barreling towards the holidays here. Gorilla Sports Off Ice got a great episode for you guys today. Head on over to trustedamerican.com. See how much money they can help you start saving today. Hello and welcome in.
Please do not leave your luggage unattended on the station.
Welcome to the show. Hey, everybody, welcome in. How is it going? Friday afternoon here in the Gorilla Sports Studios. I'm Jesse Montano. She's Meghan Angley. That is Charlie, the wiener dog, right down there. He'll make a more grand appearance here, I'm sure, soon. Meghan, it's Friday. You made it. We all made it to the end of the week. How you doing?
I'm so good because when I walked in, Charlie walked right up to me, and he might do that to everyone. Don't tell me if he does.
Nope.
And he let me pet him and rub his belly, and I'm so happy.
No, he doesn't just walk up to anybody. So you have to be chosen for sure. We should have set one. We shouldn't have had a tight on me. We should have just gotten a Charlie cam for this whole this whole episode.
I mean, you're gonna put him on your lap at some point.
I will. I'll get him up on my lap.
So cute.
Sorry, I got a text. Chloe said your mic is.
Sorry, Chloe. Rookie mistake.
So sorry, I was distracted. I'm all over the board from that read to off to a wobbly start here. We talked defense, kind of running through how the Avs stack up against the rest of the league. In our last episode, we also talked about the Avs' 30th anniversary coming up this year. But on Monday, we did get into our Pacific Division preview conversation. And Meghan, to absolutely nobody's surprise, you and I talked too long and ran out of time. So we do have two teams to get to there before we start talking about the Central Division, which I do still think is the toughest division in hockey. But I'm actually going to start here. Can I find a way to shoehorn what we were working on before into this exact moment right here? Topic around the office today, Meghan. Toughest position in all of sports to play. Do you have an opinion one way or the other? We've gotten a range of answers today from folks around the office.
Yeah. Thankfully, you gave me a little bit of a heads up because it stumped me. I am most familiar with hockey, and I still landed on hockey, though, after some thought, and it's a goaltender, an ice hockey goaltender. I think there's no room for error, and the mistakes made there are the kind that end up in the back of your net and affect the bottom line. And so, you can make a mistake defensively as a D-man, a giveaway of the puck, and there's still a chance of recovery. But once that puck is in the back of the net, there's no coming back from it unless you get enough goal support in front of you. And so I think because the margin for error is so thin, and then the skill of goaltending itself is so nuanced. There's so many different styles of goaltending, and there's different sizes and athleticism that serve different goaltenders in different ways. It's something I'm fascinated by and don't know nearly enough about.
And as someone who just put on the goalie pads last week, like it's not, I remember, as a young kid starting to play hockey, it's like, oh, goalie, you just stand there the whole time. The first time I put on pads and like standing up, getting back, it's like, oh, that's horrible. That's horrible.
I might be going to goalie school, you guys.
Yeah. Oh, you might. Also, more exciting stuff that you and I have to talk about that just unfolded about 30 minutes ago.
Love.
More just fun content coming.
This is going to be a great year, you guys.
This is going to be a great year. We've got all kinds of good stuff coming your guys' way. For the record, I'm with you. I do think hockey goaltender is the toughest position to play. JJ talked about it, I think it was 2 years ago, and I thought he put it so perfectly. He said, if you are any other position on the ice, if you make a mistake, there are 5 other guys that can bail you out. If a goaltender makes a mistake, the puck's in the back of the net. And I was like, well, first of all, tell that to Josh Manson. Not true. But all jokes aside, I think you're totally right. There's so much pressure in there, and one mistake, puck's in the back of the net. And you can't hide from that. You can't get away. Megan, we left off the Pacific Division with the LA Kings. We have to talk about the Kings and the Golden Knights before we can move into the Central. But the LA Kings, I think, man, what a puzzling team for me last season. They looked so good all season long. Rock solid goaltending from Darcy Kemper from the start of the year all the way through to the end. And it looked like for most people, it said, this is the year. This is the year they finally break free from the Edmonton Oilers curse. They've got the team. Edmonton seems a little bit depleted. They're so rock solid down the middle. As you mentioned on our show on Wednesday, such a solid, defensive team, not just good defense, such a good defensive team. They were getting good goaltending. It seemed like not only was this the year that they had taken enough steps to get past the Edmonton Oilers, it even felt like they're built to beat the Oilers.
Right.
And Edmonton ends up making quick work of them. And now you're kind of at this point where you're left scratching your head. And then on top of that, the LA Kings, for a long time, I made jokes about the Dallas Stars being the NHL's best over 35 team. It might be the LA Kings going into next season after just some interesting off-season acquisitions that, like I said, just really kind of moved the age north. Your thoughts on the LA Kings? Let me actually start here before we get into previewing next year. Were you as perplexed by them last year as I was?
Well, their regular season results weren't surprising to me, and the strength of play in Darcy Kemper in the regular season also not entirely surprising given the regular season he had in Colorado that cup year. And I think he deserved a better fate in the playoffs and had some weird injury things crop up that kind of hampered his play. And so given the strength of this team defensively over the course of the season, the emergence of Brant Clark on their back end, obviously up front, they've always been so solid down the middle, very stingy, hard to play against. Great goaltending from Kemper. Not surprised by those results. I think they're built to be that. But then the struggles in the playoffs is where there's a little bit of disappointment. And so I will say, I think the LA Kings are still a competitive team going into next year. But I'm worried that the way in which they've addressed this next year over this summer hasn't really answered for what has given them problems against Edmonton in the playoffs now 4 straight times in a row. And as good as they are defensively, their special teams kind of disappeared in key moments, which is tough because even the Colorado Avalanche were in that category with a struggling PK and a power play that couldn't convert. So I say that as a deal breaker for all good teams in the playoffs. Every team we've talked about that had an exit that was maybe earlier than people thought, special teams dried up in one way or another. It was also an issue of not being able to hold leads. And so finishing out games strong for LA proved to be a problem. And what's tough is I usually point to some kind of maturity across the group or experience, a lack of experience. And I look at LA and there's a lot of experience. This is a bit older of a group, a bit more mature. And they doubled down on that this offseason, getting a little bit older and a little bit meaner, but not really doing anything to get faster and younger. That limits their window. And I'm not sure then how that changes what they're going to be going into next year.
So to your point of didn't do much to help the aging curve here. Anton Forsberg, Brian Dumoulin, Cody Ceci, Yoel Armia, Corey Perry, all signed on July 1, all over the age of 31, with Corey Perry coming in the oldest at 40. Now, recent history would say, well, they added Corey Perry. They are going to be the West's best team this year come playoffs.
They'll get to a cup final
and march all the way to the Stanley Cup final where they'll ultimately be disappointed. But I'm with you. It's not unlike the conversation that you and I had around Yoel Kiviranta for the Avs. When I look at each one of these deals in a vacuum, it's like, yeah, not a bad player, not a bad deal. Not a bad player, not a bad deal. But I look at who they added relative to where they struggled last year come playoff time. And it's like, does any of this really address, other than physically taking Corey Perry off the Edmonton Oilers roster and putting him on LA's, does this do anything to move the needle for a team that clearly has a hump that they need to get over in the Edmonton Oilers, a team that'll likely be looking to take another step this year? I just don't know if that did anything for me to move the needle in a way that says, yes, this is going to be a team that's more competitive than they were last year. I'm with you. I thought they were a really good team last year. You and I talk often on this show about how underrated of a season Darcy Kemper had here in Colorado, because Ryan Johansson almost took his eye out in the playoffs, and that led to some uneven results. He was outstanding for the Avs.
He was kind of dark horse Vezina conversation that season.
Completely agree.
And that was outside of the Avs bubble, right? That there was that chatter. And I think why on the heels of this now 922 save percentage season for Kemper with LA this last year, 889 in the playoffs, when we were talking about Hockey Canada and goaltending, maybe that playoff performance has a little bit of an impact just in that depth chart. Doesn't mean he won't get consideration if they do decide to add more from this point on, but I think that had something to do with it.
Well, and I remember that being what they said about Binnington, was like, oh, he's a gamer. He's up and down, but you get into the finals and he was, give him credit, he did
good for St. Louis, despite not getting the result that they wanted out of this last year, which we'll get to in a little bit.
Yeah, we'll get to. Well, and he was also good for Hockey Canada as they moved further into the medal round, gold medal game, all that stuff. Anything else on LA? I mean, this is just a team that I like a lot of what they've got there. I like the back end. They do move on from Jordan Spence in the offseason, which I know is a little bit of a conversation as I'm holding off a sneeze here. Around, again, a player that had a really good year last year for them. Moving on from him. Anything else on the LA Kings before we get to the winners of the Pacific Division? I do want to, I guess I'll add one last thing. Drew Doughty had a little bit of a resurgence last year, which ended up with him on Team Canada for Four Nations, somewhere they didn't have him at the start of the year. But you've got Kevin Fiala, Andrei Kopitar, Quentin Byfield, Philip Deneau, Adrian Kempe, Andrei Kuzmenko. There's good pieces here. I like Yoel Armia. I think Corey Perry is still an effective player, even at 40. Like there's parts and pieces to like, but it's, can you put it all together when you need to and play the way that you need to when you inevitably run into the Edmonton Oilers come playoff time?
Yeah. So that's where I want to emphasize why I still think LA is competitive. One, in going back to that defensive metric that we talked about the other day, this is one of the best defensive teams in the league, and they deserve credit for that. I think they can continue as constructed to be a good defensive team. I think where they ran into trouble is keeping up with the high octane offense and speed of teams like Edmonton, which it's not just Edmonton that you have to worry about if you're LA. That's going to be true of a lot of opponents that they might face. So the speed and the pace is still going to be a bit worrisome for LA, but their strength of defense and a little bit of that grit and toughness with players like Corey Perry has improved going into this next year. So a lot rides on Darcy Kemper and his regular season form translating to the offseason, and a little bit more trust in their depth, because how some of these players get deployed in the bottom six, because they have 8 forwards with 40 or more points in the regular season, a great regular season record too after the deadline. And so the trust, though, in how they deployed some of the bottom of that lineup wasn't quite there. And so when I see the older players that they've added this offseason, to include Brian Dumoulin, a 33-year-old player, I think that's probably why is there was a lack of trust past the top 6, a lot of trust in the back end, good trust in Darcy Kemper. And I think that in order to really ride with the Edmonton Oilers, you need to trust your depth and deploy lines 1 through 4 a little bit more evenly. Maybe that's what caused a little bit of trouble for them. So I'll be curious to see. I still feel like the pace is the worry for me with LA.
And it always has been with that group too, right? Like that's, even when they were in their era, their championship era, like they were the team that kind of bucked the trend of slower, heavier, kind of grind you down. And it, they've stuck with that as the league has gotten faster, which is a choice given how the last 4 seasons have
Well,
been.
and it's you live and die by it in having a great defensive team. That's kind of what you're hoping for in having the experienced, more defensive-minded players that are represented here that also are a little bit older. But you are still going to need to be able to keep up with teams like Edmonton at the end of the day.
I completely agree. The Vegas Golden Knights, which, this is a team that I think is going to fascinate us for years and years and years to come. I have made the argument before, Megan, that I think the Vegas Golden Knights are rebuild proof. They're in a no state tax state. It's a city, a suburb of Vegas, Summerlin, that players just rave about living in. You've got ownership that is committed to winning. This is the team that has led the league in attendance since they've arrived in the NHL. You got a great fan base. You got management that's aggressive, and this is a team that has proven time and time and time again, much to the chagrin of most of the rest of the NHL, salary cap's just kind of a made-up thing that you can always get your way around. They're in on every big-name free agent, every big-name player that hits the trade market. And it seems like there is a mutual interest in those players wanting to play in Vegas as well. Obviously, the big splash comes this summer with the addition of Mitch Marner. Right now, sitting $7 million over the cap, but that is not counting when you move Alex Pietrangelo to LTIR, who will miss, it looks like, the entire season. So while they continue to improve up front, now Mitch Marner, Jack Eichel, Mark Stone, Tomas Hertl, William Karlsson, Ivan Barbashev, and then you get into, your depth, Keegan Colasar, Brett Howden, Riley Smith, Brandon Saad. Stout up front, question marks maybe starting to emerge on the back end. Shea Theodore, Noah Hannafin, Braden McNabb, Zach Whitecloud, Jeremy Lazon. And then give him credit, give him full marks. Aiden Hill had a better season than I was expecting as a full-time starter. But for me, it's question marks on the back end and still waiting to see for sure what Aiden Hill is at the NHL level for me. Your thoughts on the Vegas Golden Knights?
Well, I think the addition of Mitch Marner really changes things because they were still a deep and mature group that I think is built for playoffs and the identity that they've embraced going back to last year. I still felt that they could make a pretty good run for it. But
let me just interrupt you real fast to add to that point. This is a team that they're never out of it to me, and they're always a threat. You know what I mean? Like, I think any game or playoff series against the Vegas Golden Knights is something that you have to take very seriously. And I just wanted to build on that point you were making of like, yeah, this team just feels like a threat every time you see them.
And the addition of Marner makes it that much more of a threat because when you evaluate what kind of went wrong for them this last year, there was some depth scoring inconsistencies. A little bit of a weaker performance from Aiden Hill, 893 in the playoffs versus a 907 in the regular season. I'm not pinning this on Aiden Hill, though. I think that was a goaltender that was good enough to get the job done. I think the elite talent at the top of the lineup lacked some of the offensive creativity that they had in the regular season. And so players like Eichel, had a really strong regular season, career high 94 points, 66 assists. Dorofeyev, 35 goals. Thomas Hertl, 14 power play goals. It just kind of declined in the playoffs, and they had a second in the league power play in the regular season that in the late stages of that, series against Edmonton couldn't convert when they needed it most. And so timely scoring is something that I'll bring up with respect to some of these other teams, but certainly true of the Vegas Golden Knights, who I think typically can count on their top performers continuing to be top performers in the playoffs. But I think that lapsed just a little bit for them. And so Mitch Marner improves that bottom line. Like, I know Mitch Marner's playoff performances specifically get called into question sometimes, but this is a contract year for Jack Eichel, who, whether his future is still with Vegas, and this is an important window then for them to capitalize on having him and him being personally motivated to have a strong year. If that is something that's being held up, if that's re-signing with Vegas, if that's even possible, all that to say, all of those things should motivate this group to put their best foot forward. And given the continued consistent regular season results that are very good, I think they're a dangerous team, and Marner just makes them that much more dangerous. And since there are players like Eichel that are present there, it alleviates some of the pressure of Marner needing to be that guy and that guy alone. And having some of the experience of players like Mark Stone and Tomas Hertl also represented there, I think takes a little bit of the pressure off of Marner in Vegas.
Well, and I'm going to be curious to see, like, it's one of those things that for me, because Mitch Marner played with Austin Matthews. I was going to make the point a minute ago, like, and he's getting to play with Jack Eichel. He played with Austin Matthews, William Nylander, John, like, Mitch Marner is not a stranger to playing with other elite players. But I do wonder, I'm going to be so curious. I would not be surprised at all to see Mitch Marner pop off in the playoffs this year, purely based on environment. This is a winning environment, and I feel like it is. You could see it on the face of Toronto Maple Leaf players. When those playoff games and series started to get away from them, it was the look of, here we go again. We're going to lose. And Vegas, I think, is the opposite, where they just always expect that they're going to find a way to win.
Right. They don't count themselves out either.
Ever. Right. And you still have William Karlsson, who's part of that original Misfits, Riley Smith, that remember that people counted us out every day at every turn in that first year, and they just kept marching on. And so I'm really curious to see what Mitch Marner does here in that type of environment. But then on top of that, I look at Jack Eichel, with all due respect to Mark Stone, who I think is an outstanding player. Mitch Marner's probably going to be the best player that Jack Eichel has ever played with, at that time. Yeah, he played with Sam Reinhart, who has really turned into a special player, now with Florida. But, like, you're going to get 28-year-old Mitch Marner and 28-year-old Jack Eichel together. And like you said, they're both going to be highly motivated. Mitch Marner is in a place where he feels like he can win. And I think you're going to have a team that's set to rally around that a bit of, not only do we want to win and see Mitch succeed, but Toronto fans were the first ones to say hockey doesn't belong in Vegas. The fans don't know anything. It's not a hockey market. That there is going to be, I'm sure they've already started telling Mitch that type of stuff. All the people in Toronto are going to think that you ran away from, a place where people are going to scrutinize and all that stuff. I think this is going to be a highly motivated group. Like I said, as long as they can get that back end to maybe overperform a little bit, I think this is an extremely dangerous team in the Western Conference.
And this was a team, too, that their defensive metrics in that chart we talked about earlier in the week are still decent and good as a team. I don't hate Vegas's back end, but I think there are some that I favor is kind of where I'm at. Like, I really like Zach Whitecloud. We talked about this the other day.
Yeah.
Braden McNabb, Noah Hannafin, Shea Theodore. Like, I think it's still a pretty strong back end. It's
how do you adjust without now having Pietrangelo, who
it's
is
a
such an
huge
anchor?
loss.
Yeah.
But I think it's better constructed than others. And this is what's frustrating about Vegas too, is their top 9 is kind of sickening. Picture this. You've got Ross Colton, Jack Drury, and Joel Kiviranta going up against Brandon Saad, William
Right.
Karlsson, and Riley Smith.
Right. And this is exactly our point, folks. Everyone who just said we were being negative. This is the point.
Even if we take out one of those players, right? We've got Ross Colton, Joel Kiviranta, and Cool Guy. I still hate this. I'm not giving up on Cool Guy, you guys, but I need to emphasize the importance of something and someone on that third line, different from just run it back
It was fine
with Kivy there and elevate Jack Drury, because
Right.
I have no personal issues with Jack Drury. I think that he could be a 3C in the near future. I also don't know. What's interesting too is when I hear other people talking about this third line, one, there is no consensus. It is all over the place what everybody is imagining for the bottom 6 for the Avs, generally speaking. I sent Jesse a screenshot of what NHL Tonight, what their projected lineup was for the Avs. And I make mention of that because nobody knows what the Avs are going to do if they're bottom 6. That's kind of the bottom line.
Right.
And so it's interesting to me, though, in all of these projections, nobody has Russ Colton as the 3C.
Yeah,
And
got him on the wall.
I find it so interesting. I even haven't put him there, but maybe I need to revisit that possibility.
Well, and to your point, it's just funny because that was
what they brought him for, and he did it.
Right.
His first year kind of full time, and it wasn't bad.
Let's circle back to the Avs because we are going to get them.
You're right.
But again, it's a great call out when you see a group like Vegas and their 1 through 9 is as strong as it is.
And even then their top 4 on the back end.
Right. It just underscores what we were talking about last week when we were talking about the Kiviranta deal. All right. Well, let's move from a team that I think we both agree is a Stanley Cup contender in the Vegas Golden Knights to a team that is probably going to be fishing around for another first overall pick in the Gavin McKenna sweepstakes. And that's the Chicago Blackhawks. Boy, oh boy, this is a team that I think they thought were going to take a step, and it looked maybe even rougher than it did in Bedard's first year for the Blackhawks on the whole. They finished ahead of only the San Jose Sharks, not just in the Western Conference, but league-wide. They finished with 61 points. And again, an offseason where we keyed in so much on the San Jose Sharks and how they are doing things the right way and setting themselves up to take steps. This summer, the Chicago Blackhawks go out and they move on from Victor Soderstrom. They add Andre Burakovsky. They bring in Sam Lafferty from the Buffalo Sabres. And then the big move of the summer, Megan, Avalanche legend Dominic Toninato gets a 2-year deal in Chicago. Now at 31 years old. Can you believe that? Dominic Toninato, 31 years old. Otherwise, kind of just standing pat. Your highest paid players now, Andre Burakovsky and Tyler Bertuzzi, Teuvo Teravainen, Nick Foligno, Jason Dickinson, Ilya Mikheyev, Ryan Donato, Sam Lafferty, Frank Nazar, Lucas Reichel, and then, of course, Connor Bedard. On the back end, Alex Vlasic, Connor Murphy. I don't even know how to pronounce it. I need Mark.
Levshunov.
Spencer Knight in net and Connor Bedard may be the beacon of hope for this team. But Megan, this is a team that, again, I see as for as tough as the Central Division is, this looks like it's probably going to be the division's punching bag once again.
Sorry, shaking my head. They are really counting on Andre Burakovsky to be more than he even was in Colorado, right? This is a player in the Cup run that was kind of rotated in and out and
healthy scratch
in a third line capacity that you are hoping can elevate some of the talent and skill around Bedard to better complement him. And I find that nerve-wracking. I think that Burakovsky helps their top six? Does he specifically give a player like Connor Bedard what he needs? I'm not sure that anyone here really does. Like we talked about this, Bertuzzi, the type of player that he is, valuable to a team's, I would say, top 9, but the style of play I don't think is what Bedard needs to help complement what he does best. It's a little bit a balance of it's Arturi Lehkonen, that's the type of player that Connor Bedard needs. And they lacked leadership, veteran presence. I think there's a little bit more of that, but that's a very young back end that feels like they are not being guided by anybody.
Nobody.
They are wandering aimlessly, and that's not going to be good for any of their development. There's a little bit more veteran presence captured in the forward group, but still not as much as I'd like to see, and not in the right way, right? Like you still need to have the veteran presence captured, but enough skill to support Bedard.
Right.
It's just confusing. Vaguely in the chat said they're constructed oddly. That's how I feel. Spencer Knight, agree he's a beacon of hope. This is a young goaltender that I think his, trajectory coming up through the league has been thrown off track a little bit at times, and he's getting back on track with opportunity and consistency. And, he gets traded in March, so his numbers are few, only plays 15 games, 896 in that time, but a 907 in Florida before that. And he played a career high 32 games with a 908 save percentage in Florida once upon a time as well. I think we haven't begun to scratch the surface as to what this young goaltender is. So I think he can be a stabilizing presence in net, but with a young goaltender who has
going where I was going to say
some, there's something to be said for the game between the ears is how I think Jared Bednar refers to it, where it's how you process the mental side of the game. And this is so tough with young goaltenders, and why I think teams like San Jose and Anaheim have been careful in how they have brought Askarov up through the ranks and Lukas Dostal up through the ranks, and even Dustin Wolf in Calgary. And so I worry that with the state of the team and just what appears to be a confusing direction, we talked about this, I think they lack a little bit of an identity and a direction in the plan moving forward.
Absolutely.
Compared to other teams that are committed to the rebuild and are going through the phases very gradually. So it's meant some pain up front, but there's a plan at the end of the day. I think Chicago has sought out more immediate results, and that is what is costing them ultimately right now. All that to say, I worry about the confidence of a young goaltender.
That's where I was going to go,
with Spencer Knight, who I think the mental side of the game, understandably, that can weigh a lot on a goaltender.
Well, and you also wonder, in my opinion, about a guy like Bedard on that same thing.
Oh,
where it's
yeah.
Like, are you literally about to go through his entire ELC just getting the crap kicked out of you every single night? And at a certain point, when does and I'm gonna draw a parallel across sports here. I talked about this with our own Nate Jackson last season, or going into last season for the Denver Broncos, of that losing culture and that losing mentality that had just crept in. And, we saw the Denver Broncos over the last decade. Things are really on the up now, but in that decade, there were so many games where it was like, wow, they're right in it, and they'd find a way to lose late. And that to me that's a losing culture. As what we were talking about a minute ago with the Vegas Golden Knights, how they find a way to win. They never count themselves out. Teams that expect to lose, they expect to lose. You can feel it when you walk into the building. You can feel it in the locker room. You can feel it in the players' confidence. Doesn't matter if you're up by 3 goals, 5 goals, with up by a goal with a minute left. You feel like you're going to lose. And if they start letting that creep into not only Connor Bedard but Spencer Knight as well, if it's just beat down after beat down, you really do run the risk of kind of messing all this up. And a blue chip prospect like Connor Bedard, you run the risk of really getting his career off to a rough start. I look at this roster and it says, okay, they're banking on now Gavin McKenna coming in next year to be a compliment to Connor Bedard, and then they'll go from there. And I don't see a team that is competitive.
I think that's 2 years too late for Bedard, right?
I agree.
In terms of a lot can happen in that time to break somebody and harm their morale and harm the team morale, because reading between the lines of everything around Seth Jones just before he was ultimately traded was a player who didn't just want out, but needed out. the morale around the room, it was shot. It was a losing culture, and he needed out. And I think that has gone unaddressed, and there just needs to be a little bit more around this team that points to a longer term plan at the very least to demonstrate why the pain right now is worthwhile.
Mm-hmm. Well, I mean, like there were even times over the last couple of seasons where folks were talking about like, oh, they should bring back Patrick Kane. It's like, no, that is not what this group needs. And I think what you just said, like, and I remember feeling this way about the Avs at one point, right before Patrick Waugh's departure and Jared Bednar came in, where it did feel a little bit directionless. And we come to find out later, yeah, it was because you had two parts of the front office that were wanting to go in different directions.
Right.
So you were ending up doing neither. Patrick Waugh leaves, the front office gets united, and they're able to start this gradual build. Right now, it feels like the Chicago Blackhawks are in that directionless, you got to show some semblance of a plan phase.
Get it together.
But for the sake of the rest of the Central, if they could hold off a couple of years, I think that would be good, because it starts turning into a gauntlet a little bit, and it either starts with this next team, depending on how you feel about them. Because while I do think last year was a bit anomalous in terms of how bad it went,
yeah,
I don't know how much better they're actually going to be, and it's the Nashville Predators. This was this was the Central Division's AIGM candidate.
Stop. I love this.
Where
has become a thing.
Yeah, each division has one, maybe, where they did just kind of go out and they were like, all of the oldest, biggest name free agents, we're bringing them all in on with term. Right after they traded all of their biggest name, oldest players. They replaced Matt Duchene and Ryan Johansson with Ryan O'Reilly and Jonathan Marchessault. Roman Josi, still a really solid defender on the back end, but was clearly on the outside of the Norris conversation last year, an award that he won the previous year, or was a runner-up the previous year, I guess. Many thought he was going to win the year before. You got Roman Josi, you got Brady Shea. I don't think Nick Hague is a bad player on your back end. And then again, you got Philip Forsberg, Steven Stamkos, Jonathan Marchessault, Ryan O'Reilly, Michael Bunting, Eric Holla. If the year was 2018, you're salivating right now. It's not. It's 2025, Megan. What do you say about the Nashville Predators?
Okay. They
might just be enough to sum it up.
They have a lot of work to do to dig themselves out of the hole that was last season. They went out and were competitive in getting the best players available, like you just mentioned. And then it was not a good mix. There was not enough consideration for the compatibility, stylistic fit, different leadership styles, presence of so many different voices in the room. And it led to a chemistry mess for the Nashville Predators.
And it sounds like the morale tanked quickly, which again, I think stems from what you're just talking about of who's the leader in here. We got 10 ex-captains and 9 former assistant captains, and then our current captain. And it just seemed like that room went to shit immediately.
Yeah. I don't know if I already made this comparison for a different team, but when we were talking about some of the murmurs of what was going on with the Winnipeg Jets locker room a couple seasons ago, I think it has since vastly improved. But this is what it feels like for the Nashville Predators, though the regular season results struggled because of this. The bottom 6 is a black hole. They're just not getting enough or any offense from the bottom of the lineup. And defensively, their depth is thin beyond the top pair, and that right side is completely weak. And they struggled then to generate consistent offensive zone pressure, kind of had a decent penalty kill, a really struggling power play given all of the talent that you brought in that has power play experience. Right. It did not translate to any form of success on the man advantage. And so this summer, it's like they're a little anchored in what they're able to do. Eric Holla, a player, had 21 points with New Jersey last year, before that 35, but a 40-point player more consistently before that. So I think 21 points is a bit of a dip. I think that will add a little bit to the depth of this lineup, but I don't think it's enough to make up for the ground that was lost in this last year. Nick Hague, reliable defender, I think stabilizes the back end a little bit. They add Nick Perbix, who I think is a depth defenseman, but I think that right side is still, even with the addition of Perbix, kind of weak. And goaltenders, I still really like UC Saros, but understandably, remember Scott Wedgwood's numbers coming out of Nashville? Everybody was so worried. You just have to understand the context of this team this last year. I don't put much stock then in 896 save percentage for Saros last year, 888 for Anunen in the 23 games he played with them, the sub 900 goaltending. I think if they can find a little bit more chemistry with the team playing in front, goaltending numbers will naturally just get a little bit better around that. But a lot of this is, it's like team building exercises that Nashville is going to need really going into next year.
And then the part that I think is the hardest for them right now is you went out and signed, all those big name free agents, Stamkos, Marchessault, O'Reilly. And with the exception of Ryan O'Reilly, there's a lot of these contracts that are hard to move. Like you are kind of just in it with this group. And again, I'm not sitting here trying to, I think Steven Stamkos still a serviceable player. I think Jonathan Marchessault still a good player. Ryan O'Reilly, I was stumping for at the deadline last year of the ideal third line center for the Avs, before they got Brock Nelson, to fill in on that second line and things like that. But Ryan O'Reilly at 4.5 for the next 2 seasons, I think is the only contract that if you said we really want to change this up, that's probably the only one that you can reasonably move. No?
Which one?
O'Reilly?
Yeah.
Steven Stamkos, $8 million for 3 more seasons. Jonathan Marchessault, 5.5 for 4 more seasons. They're not going to want to eat much of that money. And those are just going to be hard to move.
They might have to do the sacrificial thing too, like with the Avs moving on from Coyle in order to clear up some space, and also move on from Wood also to clear up some space.
A player that you like,
yes,
might have to go with.
And so here's what I think too, with Ryan O'Reilly perhaps needing to be moved out in the way that Coyle needed to be moved out, is because they don't really have a strong bottom 6. So when I look at the production they got from the top 6 last year between Stamkos, Marchessault, Forsberg, Ryan O'Reilly, and then Bunting and Evangelista, it's fine. I don't have an issue with it. They were getting some production, but there's a black hole still for the bottom 6. And so they might have to, that's fine if they're getting some depth scoring. It's not enough though. And so they might have to part ways with a player like Ryan O'Reilly to build out the bottom 6, because it's not sufficient as it is right now.
Yeah, this went from a team that looked like it was going to be really threatening in the Central Division to a team that looks just a little bit like a jumbled mess.
This is perfect timing.
This is perfect timing. We got a super chat here. Charlie Treat Fund. You would love a treat fund, huh? You would love a treat fund.
What's his favorite kind of treat?
He was a big Beggin' Strips dog for a long time. Cheese is probably his number one thing, is shredded cheese, and he would crush it. He'd need a whole block. Okay, thank you.
I think he's so cute.
Here, Chuck, you have anything?
What is it called? Cuteness overload? There's a word for cuteness aggression or something.
Oh yeah. Where you just want to
well, and I don't want to squeeze Charlie, but I'm unwell. I'm just overcome with how adorable he is.
If you want to get down, let me know. I don't want you jumping on those little legs of yours. All right. Let's move on here. And this is where I think this division,
now we're talking,
really just turns into a gauntlet. And like I said,
I'm ready to be hurt again.
I think Nashville has a roster that could take some steps that could, make them competitive. So that's what I'm saying. Depending on how you feel about Nashville, it either starts there. But for me, and like you said, I'm ready to be hurt again. The Utah Mammoth, formerly the Utah Hockey Club, formerly the Arizona Coyotes. I think I'm going on 7 straight seasons of picking these guys as my dark horse playoff. This team's going to really make some noise. and they haven't done it. It feels like they've taken incremental steps. I like a lot of what they've done this summer, namely bringing in JJ Peterka. I like Josh Doan, Michael Kesselring, good players. You're leveling up with JJ Peterka coming over from the Buffalo Sabres. And you add that to, Clayton Keller, that group that's already there. You add Jack McBain, or you re-sign Jack McBain, excuse me. Nate Schmidt comes over from Florida. Sorry, that startled me. It sounded like someone was about to bust
in and steal Charlie.
Yeah, seriously. Sorry, I'm just moving over here. JJ Peterka, Clayton Keller, Dylan Guenther, who you and I talked about preseason last year. I really like Nick Schmaltz. Lawson Krause has started to round out his game as well. I absolutely love Logan Cooley as a player. And then I think Mikhail Sergachev is an outstanding defenseman as well. Sean Dursey, John Marino. And then I've been a big fan of Karel Vejmelka in net. Connor Ingram backing up. Meghan Angley says, what about the Utah Mammoth?
Oh, I like this team so much. And it's not unfounded. Okay, one, in my little formula that I was doing to evaluate team defense and as a result backends, Utah came in as a surprising kind of dark horse candidate for being a strong team defensively. And what I find interesting is, one, the strong season of Michael Kesselring allows his capital to rise just enough for them to get a really high producer in JJ Peterka. And I think this is good because what Kesselring brought to the back end in terms of contributions is super important. But Mikhail Sergachev had 53 points and 15 goals last year. They got a lot of production from their back end, and they were missing two key players for so much of last season that I think they are counting on the full season of Marino and Dursey to make up for the ground that is lost in Kesselring. And obviously, Doan, a depth player. They had Brandon Tanev, who has a lot more experience and plays this high energy kind of forechecking game that is going to round out the bottom of that forward group with something that just always needs to be represented in a bottom six. I really like Tanev's game. And Peterka then just improves the scoring punch from the top of the lineup because Clayton Keller, he's consistently a high producer. Mm-hmm. It just doesn't get talked about enough because of the results that typically follow this team, but he comes on the heels of a 90-point season, 30 goals, Cooley 65 points, 25 goals. Guenther, only his third season in the NHL, and he has a 60-point season, 27 goals. So they're getting a strong goal share from the top, and they just inject that with more talent with JJ Peterka. It makes me excited too because it's not just offensive scoring punch. They have some good foundation in terms of how they execute defensively. And I think people talk about their play between the blue lines perhaps being a frustrating part of their identity, but if it's effective and supplements Vejmelka in net with a .904 save percentage this last year in 58 games, they've got pretty steady goaltending in Vejmelka. They've got now a forward group with a scoring punch at the top and a back end that's pretty well rounded. I think the injuries to Marino and Dursey for much of last year didn't give us a full picture of what this Utah club is supposed to be, can be. And they've just added this offseason. I think they've got management ownership that really cares about this team, and it shows.
You could tell the management has always wanted to do the right things, but they did not have the ownership support when they were in Arizona. They absolutely do now. The only thing that they have done this summer that I don't like was moving on from Matias Michelli. And that's tough. And that's mostly just because of how highly I think of Matias Michelli, but it wasn't in the same trade. But if you're replacing Michelli with JJ Peterka, I think you can look at that.
Well, and I think what's interesting about that is there's a standard that is being set in Utah. And so Michelli, I don't think he had a bad season, but when his production waned, they were not shy about sitting him out games, kind of gave him the Malinsky treatment, but he was a more highly touted prospect receiving this treatment. And I think a change of scenery will do him very well. But I'm curious to see if I'm right about maybe a winning culture that they're trying to establish and inspire growth out of their players that might at times demand a lot of them. I'm curious to see how that translates moving forward then. For a player like Peterka, who I think has only continued to grow, he's still very young in this league. I think people like it's only his third season, and his third full NHL season. He comes on the heels of a 68-point season, 50 points before. Peterka has come into the league hot, but I think some people, he gets the Buffalo treatment, not so different from a middle stat, like, well, you're not carrying enough. And that's just too much pressure, I think. I think that will be leveled out in Utah. There's still high expectation. Hopefully it's in a way that really connects with Peterka, but also maybe a little less pressure off being the player to bring Buffalo out of whatever era that they're in. It's different in Utah, I would like to think. And that's what I want to see and look at more closely next year.
I think that's a team that's going to make a push for the playoffs. A team that many counted out, including myself, at the start of the season, and especially as the season wore on, before a late season surge and an extended winning streak put them in position to make the playoffs. And again, this is just why this St. Louis Blues are a big reason why I talk about the Central Division being the toughest division in hockey. Even the teams that, when you look at the roster, you look at the way the teams put together, you look at the way they start the season, you just can never count them out. The St. Louis Blues, like I said, a late season push, end up getting into the playoffs. Jordan Kyrou, Robert Thomas, Pavel Buchnevich, Braden Shen, Pia Suter, Jake Neighbors, Matthew Joseph, Dylan Holloway, Alexander Texier, free agent signing Nick Bukestad, and then on the back end, Justin Falk, Torrey Krug, Colton Parayko, Philip Broberg, and then in net, the biggest, not question mark, but maybe the biggest inconsistency in the roster. What are you getting out of Jordan Binnington? And it feels like this team maybe kind of goes as Binnington goes. A team that I think everyone keeps waiting for them to fully fall off and have to go into that full rebuild mode, and they just keep finding a way to keep sticking around. Your thoughts on the St. Louis Blues?
Well, I think that the Jim Montgomery surge is real. I think his addition to the team behind the bench.
What were the Bruins thinking?
Scapegoat. AIGM, AI ownership strikes again, right? You have problem, you fire coach. That's obvious. So I think the Blues, though, benefited from this. One, familiar to the organization, already having been an assistant there once before, now as the head coach. He is a player's coach that can really rally his guys. And I think that you see that in the way that this team makes a run at a wild card spot and then gives the Winnipeg Jets hell. Like the Central Division leaders, they forced 7 games. Now, St. Louis is not without their flaws, but I want to give them their flowers, at least in surprising me, especially in making that a more intriguing matchup in the playoffs than I thought it was going to be.
Connor Hellebuyck had a hand in that.
Connor Hellebuyck, we'll talk about him. We'll talk about him. But for St. Louis, their PK was solid, but it wasn't game-changing, and they gave Winnipeg's power play some confidence later in the series. So it had, I'm not going to fall on special teams specifically with this one, but they couldn't close out tight games, and especially on the road, and they really lost it in crucial moments at the end of games, like when Winnipeg had an extra attacker. They could not defend against that for some reason. And the offense was streaky beyond their top producers. Like, they only had 3 players above a point per game, and they had great regular season results. Like, Jordan Kyrou had a 70-point season, 36 goals, but he only had 3 goals, 0 assists in 7 games in the playoffs. That's obviously not going to cut it. Robert Thomas, an 81-point season, one of those players who was above a point per game pace, but at that point, you're not getting enough scoring across the lineup. And that's why this being kind of a quiet summer for St. Louis makes it hard for me to imagine where they take the step forward specifically. I'll give Binnington his flowers too. A 901 in 7 games for the Blues. I think he gave them every chance possible. There are just some issues with not getting enough of that scoring punch when they needed it and not being able to close out games. So I'm not sure where exactly this team takes a huge step forward. They've got what could be steady goaltending in net, at least, when the stage lights get brighter. It's obviously, we've seen Binnington be a little bit hit or miss, but I think otherwise he can kind of lock it down in the
When
playoffs.
he's on for sure.
And it'll just be a question of what it's actually a lot of questions. I was like, it's just one singular question. No, it's actually a lot of questions. It's does the Monty influence carry over into next year? Do they get enough scoring from the top of the lineup, as well as the crucial depth scoring that is always needed? And defensively, is it enough? Is this back end enough? This is kind of a back end that feels a little less complete compared to some of the others that we've talked about, just like LA, Vegas. It feels a little bit more shored up, even Utah. So all that to say, St. Louis didn't do a lot this summer for them to take a huge step forward. So I'm not sure, but I'll wait and see.
I think St. Louis is the ultimate wait and see team in the Central Division. They're also getting a rebrand. They got a rebrand this summer. They will look a little visually different on the ice next season. Let's move on here. The team that is finally out from underneath the absolutely crushing weight of a couple of big buyout contracts. It's the Minnesota Wild. They are no longer with the dead cap money that was Zach Parise and Ryan Suter's buyouts. This is their first season out from under that. You are staring down a UFA, Kirill Kaprizov, after this season, so they'll have to dip into that money pretty immediately. But Kirill Kaprizov, Matt Boldy, Joel Eriksson Ek, Vlad Tarasenko, which I keep finding funny how he just keeps bouncing around now. He's going from team to team. Matt Zuccarello, still highly effective at 37. Marcus Foligno, Ryan Hartman, old friend Yakov Trenin, and Nico Sturm, as well as Nicholas Aube-Kubel. You look on that back end, you got Brock Faber, Jared Spurgeon, Jonas Brodin, Jacob Middleton, Zach Bogosian, and your boy Zeev Buyam. David Jiricek as well. Interesting. It's going to be interesting to see how things play out in net this year. No Marc-Andre Fleury. Philip Gustafsson is the number one. No question about it. I really like Kirill Kaprizov as a player. I think Zeev Buyam, despite a bit of a rocky start with the way the Minnesota Wild chose to deploy him and the situations he was put in come postseason time, I think that's still going to be a very good player on their back end. A team that can finally start looking to build now that they don't have to deal with the anchors of those two buyout contracts. How do you feel about the Wild?
I like the shout out mini. Sort of scares me from Max Powers because I think last year was a lot of wrong things happening at once for the Minnesota Wild.
I do want to point out they did make the postseason. They were the only team with a negative goal differential in the Stanley Cup playoffs last year. And
what is troubling for the Minnesota Wild was the tremendous injuries that they faced at various points last year that I think will translate to not have, you need to get those reps in. So Kaprizov misses a lot of time, only plays 41 games, still has 56 points in those 41 games. So still completely at, this peak in terms of what he is. He should get paid handsomely. Mm-hmm. Matt Boldy and Marco Rossi, two young players, take a big step forward. A 70-point season from Matt Boldy, 60-point season from Marco Rossi, and it was a 20-point jump from the year before. His ice time's up to 18 minutes a night. He's kind of ascending into this 2C role. Maybe they don't feel totally comfortable with him there, so that's still a bit up in the air in terms of what the future holds. And that will obviously shape the forward group in a big way. But their special teams near the bottom of the league over the regular season. And I think a lot of this can be attributed to the injuries to some of their best players, starting with the back end, where I think it was hurt perhaps the most. You have both Spurgeon and Brodin miss a lot of time on the back end during the regular season. I think Eriksson Ek missed a decent amount of time up front for the Wild. So genuinely, just another team where I don't feel like I saw what they were fully capable of, not so different from how I described Utah missing Jersey and Marino from the back end. This Minnesota Wild team was missing a lot of players who are very important to this group at many points in the regular season. But Gustafsson has a .913 save percentage season. I still think of him as a young goaltender. He's one of those that's not as young as I mentally think of him, but he's kind of at a stage where it's make it or break it to assume the full-time starter job. And I think he's had a strong season to make a case for that. And so I look at the addition of Ziv Buyam, who has a full NHL season, hopefully, ahead of him. And hopefully then his usage makes a little bit more sense. In terms of how the Wild have changed from last year, my hope is just health, right? Like if this is a healthy team, then I think it's a competitive team. I think you add Tarasenko and you get a little bit more to count on for scoring contributions at the top of the lineup. I think he is, though, at the stage of his career where that's not, Tarasenko was a name that used to command
elite
especially
goal scorer.
Yes, when you think of that, and he's had a 33-point season with Detroit last year, 11 goals, 22 assists. Still not, production you'll turn away,
Right.
but you have to be a little bit realistic in evaluating what he is at this stage of his career. And I still think it helps, though, up front for the Minnesota Wild. So another wait and see team that I have a lot more optimism around, because unlike the St. Louis Blues, who I saw a more complete version of what they are, and they just get a change of leadership behind the bench and Monty, I need to wait and see what that looks like, right? Minnesota, because they were so laden with injuries, I think they take a big step forward in this next year with a more healthy lineup.
I do still think a little thin bottom part of the lineup for me to say cup contender. But I'm with you. I think that's a good group.
Side note, this was one of my favorite decors in the league, like going back the last couple of seasons. And their defensive metrics in that like regular season composite that I did were kind of rough. And I think it has a lot to do with injuries. And it was still, pretty rough going into the playoffs. But I think this is a team that when we're evaluating like the strength of defense at the end of next year, if they've been fully healthy, I think we see that trend back up.
Mm-hmm. I got to take my one little shot here. I think Bill Guerin has become a little bit of a mess in that GM office. And so I do think that, all jokes aside, I think that could be one potential thing that could derail what I think is a really strong group right now. Nice combination of young players with some, guys who are established in the league, high-end talent. I think Bill Guerin has gone a little crazy in that front office there. I'm going to skip the Avs. We'll finish with them, which moves us to the team that took the Avs out of the playoffs, Mikko Rantanen's new home. I just said this morning, I was building the graphic for this show, and I said, I still cannot believe that happened in Game 7 the way that it did. The Dallas Stars. They are in do or die territory here for last season, this season, and probably one more beyond this. This is your window. Not only because of so much of your core is now entering that 35 to 35 plus range. But you are up against it cap wise. Yes, you got Wyatt Johnston, who's a young player. You got Thomas Harley, who's a young player that can help, fill in some of those roles as the Jamie Benns, Tyler Sagans retire. But the Dallas Stars went all in on borrowing from next year's cap with performance bonuses, things like that, to make it all fit to get the players re-signed for this season. But like I said, this is, they've still got one more tough decision ahead of them probably before the season officially gets started. But they do decide to move on from Mason Marchment to try to make some money work. They move on from Matthew Dumba, trying to make the money work. Not a ton of room to go out and add on the free agent market, really just kind of taking care of their own internal business. But it's Mikko Rantanen, it's Tyler Seguin, it's Rupe Hintz, it's Wyatt Johnson, it's Jason Robertson, Matt Duchene, Sam Steele, Jamie Benn, Radek Faksa, Maverick Bork, Miro Heiskanen on the back end, Esa Lindell, Thomas Harley, and then, of course, Jake Ottinger in net, who I don't know if he got enough credit for Dallas getting out of that first round series against the Avs. This is a team that, make no mistake, this is a cup contender. They're on a tight window, so that motivation is going to be elevated given how tight they are up against the cap. Now, having given that $12 million contract to Mikko Rantanen, where are you at with the Dallas Stars?
Dallas Stars are tough because this is obviously still a really competitive team, still some of Colorado's toughest competition in the Central. But we're getting to the point too at the top of some of these divisions where teams are unable to do a lot in their off seasons because of the window that they're in. And so they've paid their good players, their big players at the top. They can't afford to do very much in the off season, which is why Avs being able to do things like re-sign Brock Nelson, I think are significant, and I don't want to breeze past it too quickly. Dallas Stars had to make some tough decisions then of which players are getting extensions, and which players do we need to move on from, which I don't know that they actually have to pull the trigger on moving Robertson.
You're right.
But the fact that it's been discussed is worrisome, just for the future window of the Stars, because it should be open, but here's where I'm at. One, they don't stand up well later into playoffs, right? Like we see where they start to fall apart by a Western Conference final. And I think what's tough is I don't know if they know how to sustain the pressure over the course of what it would take to make it to a Stanley Cup final, right? It's a war of attrition and everybody's beaten down by that stage. This is a team that I'm not sure has been hardy enough when it's all said and done, because they give their best up front, in part because the matchups with the way it has played out require it, which is tough, right? Like even Avs are not exactly on the right end of that, but the defense is interesting. Like those numbers didn't really favor Dallas in terms of the team defense, overall defense, and that's excluding goaltending. But I think they have the best 1-2-3 in the league. And I thought about this more. Like Esa Lindell, Miro Heiskanen, and Thomas Harley. That's pretty strong.
Interesting. Even though they're all on the left side.
So here's what's in the best 1-2-3, but then a really bad 4-5-6. It's young, it's inexperienced, it's a question mark. And so the right side is very weak. It's hard, right? Like if you have maybe like Heiskanen playing on his offside, it's still really competitive.
Which then really damages the depth of those pairings if you're going to put Thomas Harley and Miro Heiskanen on the same pair.
Absolutely.
I think is the point you were
right. Like Ilya Lyubushkin, more experienced, but not necessarily the strongest player. This is where, when I'm talking about like 1-2-3-4 for the Colorado Avalanche, what Girard and Manson are, I think, gets taken for granted and undervalued. So when I look at the strength at the top in what Lindell, Heiskanen, and Thomas Harley are as players, so it commands a lot of respect. And I think Thomas Harley is so sick and he's so young. This is a player to watch on the rise. And I've loved Heiskanen because I think he's very well-rounded. I think that his offensive game is so strong and pops, but another player whose defensive side of his game maybe doesn't get enough credit where it's deserved. So anyways, this isn't to pump the tires of the Dallas Stars, though. There's a problem 4-5-6 on this back end that is worth addressing. And then the overall scoring drying up. So here's where it gets interesting, right? Because they get decent production from their back end. It's in part why the loss of Heiskanen, I think, hurt a lot of those regular season results that we're talking about with defensive metrics. Heiskanen's kind of the heartbeat of not only what they're trying to do defensively, but he's a conduit for offense in a lot of ways. And so they get a lot of scoring from Thomas Harley, especially in that first round. And eventually when Heiskanen returns, it's also supplementing. But that points to then maybe an issue of where the expectation for offense to come from is being placed, like is too much being unfairly placed on those three players in Lindell, Heiskanen, and Harley. It's an issue then of maybe the players at the top of the lineup not living to expectation. That is the concern for me. Their experience at this point, I can't call this an inexperienced team. No. I think that there are lots of components of a winning culture too that made things difficult and interesting in that series against the Avs. But what's hard, and I could point to and say has been unreliable, is not getting scoring when you need it from your top players up front. I'm actually less worried about goaltending. If you know going into it, Jake Ottinger, series by series, there's a little bit of variance, and it'll probably get a little weaker as the playoffs go on. If you can account for that, though, I still think it's good enough to get you to the Cup final. I just think the scoring drying up at inopportune times and the lack of sustainability of that power play is worthy of talking about as a concern for the Dallas Stars.
Well, and so let me take it a step further in my criticalness of the offense drying up. I think there's an argument to make that the offense for the Dallas Stars, forget drying up, struggled to ever get going in a meaningful way. When you go back and you take a larger, 30,000 foot view of their postseason, Mikko Rantanen, up until about halfway through game 6 of round 1, was actually running the risk of like, ooh, not only did the Stars lose, but they did it with Mikko Rantanen being a ghost. So he struggled to get going, and they won kind of small in those first few games. Then Mikko Rantanen popped, and suddenly you had like 4 or 5 games where the Dallas Stars did not score a goal that Mikko Rantanen was not in on. And then once you got beyond that, it suddenly became, if it's not Mikko Rantanen, it's on the power play. And then once the power play dried up, it was, well, if it's not Mikko Rantanen or the power play, it's Rupe Hintz. And that was kind of like end of list. And so when you look at what they did across 3 rounds, they were kind of living on a prayer with like just enough offense to get us through these next 3 games from a really specific part of the lineup, or one line in particular. Just enough offense to get us by Winnipeg because the power play suddenly became automatic. And then you got up against another high-flying offensive team, and it just was not there. The power play dried up. Mikko Rantanen couldn't do it, by himself, and you just kind of ran out of options. And so I do look at that and say, all right, well, Mikko Rantanen, a guy who can put the puck in the back of the net, like, that's a good add. But as they got later in rounds, it showed that he struggled to be able to drive that when there was so much attention on him coming off that huge outburst that he had against the Avs, which then bled into the series against the Jets. I do wonder about their ability. And like you said, this is a team that has, historically, no more Pete DeBoer. I do think, shakes this up a little bit in the way that they're going to play. But this is a team, to the point that you made, of like, it takes a lot for them to get out of each round. And by the time they get later in the playoffs, they're beat up, they're tired, they're broken down a bit, and Jake Ottinger starts turning back into a pumpkin a little bit because there's just so much wear and tear. I think the offense needs to make it easier for them, and that starts with your point of more contributions from the back end and less pressure put on that 1, 2, 3 from their group, to help make it easier for them to get out of a couple of these playoff rounds without having to go all the way to game 7, to push these things forward. And I'm not being funny when it's too much when you're relying so heavily on Matt Duchene, 35. I guess he's not 35. I think he's 34. Tyler Seguin, right in that same range. Jamie Benn, over 35. Like, those are guys that you're counting on to be productive for you. When you're putting them through 14 games before you even get to the Western Conference Final, that's going to make it tough.
And so what's tough too is, okay, when I'm looking at the rest of that back end, I don't even have high expectation offensively. It's just, can they be trusted to help better distribute some of these minutes? I'm turning to the depth up front, the bottom 6, as a part of the lineup that needs to be more. It's not so different from the conversation we're having around what went wrong for the Avs
100%.
too, right? Like, when their stars were shut down very effectively, they needed more players to step up from the bottom. And what's tough is Dallas, and given how they're kind of handcuffed to their own cap situation with this big Mikko Rantanen contract, they lose Marchment, Dadonov, and Granlund. And they get
significant
Faksa, defensive-minded center who will kind of stabilize, but it's not necessarily a productive player that's going to add any offense. So where I'm going with this is, they need to alleviate some pressure from their back end, the top 3, in terms of minutes, and the expectation that they'll deliver offensively, though I think they still will. They need to trust some of the rest of that back end then to help take some of those minutes off. And they need more from their depth in terms of offense. Especially if that high-end core, which remains intact for Dallas, and that's why they're still dangerous no matter what. But if they do stagnate, which they have done, right? This isn't an unrealistic thing to imagine happening. They need more to count on offensively. And it's not so different from what we're going to talk about when we get to the Avs.
So we're going to move on to a team here that it could be as simple, and we could move on, as make a save when it matters.
Yeah.
The Winnipeg Jets, they add Jonathan Taves. They bring in Gus Nyquist, who loves playing in the Central Division. Other than that, they are more or less running it back, Megan. I piled on Connor Hellebuyck a lot in the playoffs as it was happening. This is a team that there's so much to like on paper, but now 2 years in a row, last year against the Avs, now this year against the Stars, just hasn't quite been there for them. Like I said, I don't really have much to say on the Jets other than you need Connor Hellebuyck to be Connor Hellebuyck beyond game number 82.
Yeah, it's costing them in a big way. They don't have
Huge.
enough in front to make up for it, though. This is a team that this is where eye test and analytics, you still need to incorporate both, because like the analytics from the regular season and then into the playoffs for Winnipeg don't have them as highly ranked as a defensive team as I regard them based on what I've seen. Now, they're still a pretty high ranked team defensively. But what I saw last season that I think deserves some credit for this team is I think they're pretty responsible defensively, and I see it in their lane management and just disallowing opportunities to get to Hellebuyck in the regular season and support him in that way. What really caught up with them in the playoffs, though, in addition to Hellebuyck falling apart, that's the biggest thing, right, is their power play, which was first in the league in the regular season, dries up. It's 8 and 43 opportunities in the playoffs. And so they're not getting the secondary scoring in the playoffs to help provide goal support up front. So I think it really falls then back on Hellebuyck a little bit to make a save, because I think this is an otherwise pretty decently defensive team. And then interestingly, I think Nikolai Ehlers, 60-point player in that range, 60 to 65-point player, still hurts, because you're looking at the way in which secondary scoring dries up. That is going to then have a little bit of a hit for this team in losing that player. And we don't know what Jonathan Toews is at this stage in his career. I think it will surprise us, but I don't know if it'll make up for the loss of Ehlers and Nyquist, another player who back in Nashville had a 75-point season in 2023-24, but his production has waned and he's been bounced around since. So I don't know if that covers enough ground in what they're going to miss from Ehlers being moved out, because I don't think they were making up for it enough offensively, even with him in the lineup, given what was happening in net. So there's a lot of ifs with Winnipeg that are interesting. Another team, though, that I think regular season, they'll probably still be at the top of the Central.
They'll be competitive for sure. I think this is an interesting call out here from Vaguely. Connor Hellebuyck, 63 games played last year, 60 the season before, 64 before that, 66 before that, and then 45 in the COVID shortened year. There were not many games beyond that in the COVID shortened year. Is he playing too much?
Let me look at Eric Comrie's numbers.
I think back to 13-14. The first year the Patrick Waugh coached Avs made the playoffs behind what I still think was a Vezina season for Semyon Varlamov. I, to this day, will die on the hill that he should have won that Vezina over Tuukka Rask. Got to the playoffs, you could physically see how tired he was. Slower to get back to his feet after whistles. Shoulders kind of slumped. Like you could see that he was tired, and that sharpness that he brought all season long that made him the Vezina runner up just was not there. I think it's a fair question to ask. Does Winnipeg, and maybe this is a Connor Hellebuyck decision, do they ride him a little bit too hard? And then by the time the intensity and all that stuff ramps up, when you're having to battle for every inch, even as a goaltender, he just doesn't have the gas. I like the comment. You can be all gas, no brakes, but you will run out of gas.
Feels like Dallas and the way that they start in the playoffs versus the way that they finish. You will pay for that later.
Mm-hmm.
What's interesting too, though, is I think that they've had decent goaltending depth that they've tried to support around him, to include now Eric Comrie, who in 20 games had a .914 save percentage. It's a goaltender you can turn to a little bit more than to alleviate some of that workload. So like you, I wonder if it's a Hellebuyck decision that perhaps needs to be overruled.
Like Georgie, he was that way.
Yes, Georgie did not want to give up games. He did not. He did not see the value of rest. And who am I to meddle in goalie affairs? But it does. There's an obvious issue here. What's interesting too is you just get every team's best in the playoffs. And so I didn't think Hellebuck played terribly against the Avs going back a couple seasons, but
he said that he felt that it was the best hockey he had ever played.
the Avs were just that good.
Right.
And so similarly, like I think Ottinger and Blackwood played a great in that Davs Davs series, in the Dallas Avs series. And in a lot of ways, it's kind of just a goalie duel at the end of the day of two very good goalies who were on. And a bad Avs PK, a struggling Avs power play, and an insane and proven unsustainable power play for Dallas. I don't mean to dunk on him. I'm a little bitter, but I also believe what I'm saying.
We're going to round out the show here with the Avs, as we've done with all these series preview shows. We are running way long here.
I didn't even think we were going to talk about the Avs today.
Oh, well, so
in general, we should talk about
what I was
them.
just about to say was, let's give them the same treatment we've given every other team. Like, let's run through it quick, because we will have several Avs preview shows between now and the start of the season. But I just want to run through it the same way we have everyone else. Just our kind of quick overview thoughts. We've talked a lot about a lot of this,
yes,
niche. So there's not going to be a lot to groundbreaking thoughts here. But I just want to make sure that we run through this as well, just to give the complete. We talked about all 32 teams on this preview series here. Obviously, the offseason kicked off with them moving on Miles Wood, Charlie Coyle, bring back Gavin Brindley, as well as a 3rd round pick and a 2nd round pick. And then in the free agent market, we thought they would maybe be a little bit more aggressive. They chose to really kind of run it back, taking care of just a lot of internal business. The big contract that they do sign in the free agent market, Megan, is, of course, Brent Burns, who Chloe left off of her defensive graphic. I just have to point out.
I love that she put Malinsky in it over Burns.
And then, they do get the extension done with Josh Manson, and they end up running it back with Yoel Kiviranta. Just over $2 million in cap space. Again, Megan, you and I have talked about this at length. This is a team that I think is a good team. The way they're put together right now, they are short on the depth of me being able to say, yeah, this is a team that can really make that run. There are tweaks still to be done in the bottom part of this lineup, specifically up front. McKinnon, Brock Nelson, Gabe Landeskog, Marty Netches, Val Nichushkin, Arturi Lehkonen, Ross Colton, Logan O'Connor, Jack Drury, Yoel Kiviranta, Parker Kelly, and then you go to the back end, Cale Makar, Devon Toews, Sam Girard, Josh Manson, Sam Malinsky, Brent Burns, Keaton Middleton hanging out right now as the extra. And then this has to be the most comfortable that you've felt about the goaltending in many, well, I guess since 22, when it was Kemper and Francouz, and that was a tandem that a lot of folks really liked, Blackwood and Wedgwood. I think a lot of what you said about Dallas, which you alluded to, is true about the way this group is put together.
Yeah, so I'm not unfairly bullying just the Dallas Stars. I'm also bullying the Colorado Avalanche.
Yes.
And this is a bottom 6 that it's in this current form, it's not complete. It's loaded with potential, right? Like eventually Logan O'Connor returns to health, and he's a part of that. And you reunite Logan O'Connor, Kelly, and Drury, and you feel really good about that. It all comes back to that third line being a bit of a question mark. And it's not as if it's a question that won't or can't be answered. It just isn't presently. So I can't speak about it super confidently until I see otherwise, because this was a problem for them in the playoffs when your stars are being guarded, shut down very effectively. One, you want to see them find ways to counter that over the course of a series. That's completely fair to say, but it wasn't for a lack of effort, right? Like you look at what they were doing to create chances at the top of the lineup, and the effort was there. You just want to see them more of a scoring threat, at least from the third lineup, right? Because what that fourth line is doing isn't necessarily being that. Though Logan O'Connor had a very productive series against Dallas. So, I really only have issue with the third line just not having enough of an impact positively. It was neutral and negative at times, especially with the role of the PK over the course of this series, which this isn't just a question of the third line. This is a question of the penalty kill as well. That stands to be answered. And it's obviously a place that the Avs need to take a step forward going into next year. And, with the Avs making some changes to coaching around the power play, Nolan Pratt, there's a big emphasis then on what he does with the PK going into next year. And since we're talking about it with the back end too, I feel comfortable 1 through 6. I know some people maybe have question marks outside of 1 through 5. I'm cool rolling 1 through 6. I like this group a lot. And that also could be a kind of the X factor for the Avs going into this year, where if you're asking me, where do they take a step forward? That's one of the areas that I think this team as a group takes a step forward in a full year of reliable and good goaltending.
You said you felt that Dallas had the best 1 through 3. I really do. I've said it before on the show. I think the Avs have the best 1 through 6 in the NHL. That's just me. People can question the number 6 if they want. I think this is the best 1 through 6 anywhere around the league. I'm with you. I look at the third line, and it's still Ross Colton and 2 empty spots for me come the end of the season, where you want it to be. You know what I mean? Logan O'Connor's not going to, he's not going to be back till about Christmas. Although, looked like he was running around pretty well at Nathan McKinnon's wedding.
I want to know how many cannonballs he did.
So he will be back at some point, you hope, before the start of the new year. You get that fourth line back together. Yeah, you can have a Yoel Kiviranta who can pull spot duty there, but he is a fourth line player, fourth line, 13th forward type guy. That's just a fact. That's what his entire career has said. So you still need, and I'm with you, this is not something that is impossible to solve. I actually think that if you're saying, oh man, the number one part of the roster we need to work on is the third line, you're in pretty good shape. You're going to be able to find players that are serviceable, that you like for that group come the end of the season, trade deadline, things like that. But this is still an incomplete bottom 6, no doubt about it.
Here's where I have a problem. Here's my hot take. I don't want to see the Avs just wait to address this at the deadline, because they've already given up assets and draft capital. Yakov Trenin, Lars Eller, Charlie Coyle, Jack Drury. I don't want to see them continue to have to give up if there is another way to address this. Not necessarily right now, August 15th.
Evgeny Kuznetsov a PTO. PTO that man.
But this is where I'm going, is everyone is kind of, maybe we've been hard on our issue with the third line as it stands. But I also don't want to just count on them addressing this at the trade deadline. It feels like a little bit of a cop-out. Now, that's not to say they can't, right? Like, that's always in the back pocket, and that provides me some comfort, okay? But I'd rather them just not find themselves at yet another deadline giving up assets and capital to resolve this issue.
For bit part players, yeah.
Yeah, I'm getting sick of it, because you know what? They probably can't keep that guy either, and it's just going to be another trade deadline issue. They're just kicking down the road, and I just want to see them resolve this more lively. And, maybe it's Jack Drury, like, growing into that. So
how do you feel about, and Evgeny Kuznetsov or whoever, I just mostly said that, how do you feel about a PTO and then leave that one spot, let Yoel Kiviranta hold a placeholder there until you can get a true third line player come deadline? How do you feel comfortable about patching one hole on the third line come trade deadline?
Yes, I was the one who said I saw Kivy be effective with Russ Colton again in the Winnipeg series going back to summer. So I'm cool with Kivy in some capacity, in the bottom 6. Maybe it is Ross Colton, Kivy, and cool guy, and maybe it's Kuznetsov, and I can finally give him a name.
And then Ross can play on the wall.
I feel a little bad. We've all just given up on Ross Colton as a center.
He was just so good there. He was so good.
I think that's all it is, right? You want to see Ross Colton regain his confidence.
Totally. Okay, there it is. That is our rundown of all 32 teams. I think we do have a super chat here. Hope Megan has fun at Girls in the Game. Jesse has a good weekend, and Charlie has the best weekend ever. I also hope Charlie has the best weekend ever.
I also hope that Charlie has the best weekend ever forever.
Shout out to Vaguely. We're catching up. We're catching up on the money that was due to the swear jar before we were able to get it in here. So here's a $20 bill going in that swear jar. The Going Deep folks did contribute several times yesterday on the show.
Oh, potty mouths.
So it is a buzz of the office. What do we do with the money at the end of the season? We'd love to. We're going to take suggestions all year long. They're going to start doing so on Going Deep as well. So $20 into the swear jar, getting us caught up. You looked very concerned about something ago, right?
Yes.
Okay. All right. I thought I had something else, but I don't think I do. Oh, that's what it was. I was going to plug Girls in the Game for tomorrow. Actually, you know what? Megan, you should probably plug this because you're going to be the one there on the panel representing Guerrilla Sports. We got Girls in the Game tomorrow.
Hey, everybody. So Girls in the Game, 9 a.m. to 1 p.m. at DU Hamilton Gymnasium tomorrow. It's free to attend for anybody interested in a career in sports. And you don't have to know what you want to do in sports, just any interest in working in sports. This will be valuable and worthwhile because you'll talk to many women around the industry who have different jobs in sports, back-end production, digital content creation, obviously the media side of it. And so there are so many avenues that you can possibly work in sports, and you can meet some women who are actually doing it right now. Like I think the Avs have representation with some of the women that are in their organization that will be there tomorrow. So just a really cool event to connect with some women who are doing it right now. Proof of concept that it could be you, the next generation of women in sports. And I will be speaking on a panel about my own path through hockey and sports. And journalism. So that's at 11. Come out and see us and support Girls in the Game.
Support Girls in the Game. And we give her a lot of love at this company in general. I just got to give another shout out to Romy Bean, one of the best in this industry. She was the one who originally, I think, put this together. Was it last year? Was the inaugural or 2 years ago?
Last year.
And I mean, Romy's just awesome and such an amazing ambassador for really just for sports media folks in general. Like whenever people ask like, oh, who's a good, media person? I'm like, Romy. Not only is she a great ambassador for sports media for Denver, but for women in sports as well. And Megan, I tell you all the time, I feel so lucky to be able to work alongside you now at a couple different outlets. You and I have been able to, our paths have been able to cross. We got Chloe back there. Ashley, who's one of my older friends. We've worked together before and was one of the first real powerful women that I was like, yeah, this is the person that everyone needs to be following. And so we're just really lucky. We got Andy upstairs, Susie, who will be there as well. Liv, who's launching her brand new show starting Monday. Mood Swings will be right here on Guerrilla Sports. We're very lucky that we work with so many great women here at Guerrilla Sports. And I've been lucky to work with some pretty great women in the past. And my wife's a pretty badass woman as well. So just shout out to all the women that I know.
Shout out to women.
Yeah,
you support women? Name all of them.
Name every woman you support right now. When we show up on Monday, I expect a written report from Bagley in the comments on just women.
All women support.
All women. Thanks so much, guys, for tuning in all week. Like I said, I know we've run long on these preview shows. We wanted to make sure we got to everybody. That's going to do it. I'm Jesse. She's Megan. That's Charlie. Got Chloe, Ashley, and John behind the glass today making all of this happen. Have a great weekend, and hopefully we'll see you at Girls in the Game tomorrow. Take it easy, everybody.
Charlie.